Well, I wasn't diagnosed until very late in life, till my mid-20s. But looking back, I could see episodes earlier than that, back into childhood that were definitely manic episodes.
Welcome to a Face Project podcast. Face Project podcast.
Hello?
It's just pure life. It's pure
And my
innocence.
mom
It's
is a
pure
writer. My
gratitude.
dad.
So I ended up in America.
I am an adopted
because
Korean and have been all my
To me,
life.
it's a perfect blend of science and creativity.
I was screaming, I will live over here till I die.
You're tuned in to a Face Project podcast featuring stories told by people from around the world that broaden our understanding of the human experience. My name is Natalie Jennings. I'm your host, and this is episode number 11. So I just got back into town, into Minneapolis, last week after heading down to Chicago for Podcast Movement 2016. It is the third annual conference for podcasters, the largest conference in the world currently. And I learned so many things. It was really, really so much fun to meet so many people pursuing this sort of newish world of podcasting, and lots of resources, lots of things and notes to sift through. We even had a karaoke night, super fun. Had a great time meeting people and learning a lot more about this crazy thing called podcasting. The keynote speakers this year, particularly Kevin Smith, yes, that Kevin Smith, and Alex Bloomberg, really, really inspired me and had some incredibly insightful things to say about the intimacy of audio and how I am talking to you right now, and there's something really special about that connection. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that just got back from there, had a great time, and looking forward to next year. If you are a podcaster or interested or thinking about starting a podcast, I highly recommend considering heading to Podcast Movement 2017, which will be in Anaheim, California. Before I dive into today's story, I'd like to talk a little bit about ways that you can interact with us at a Face Project and keep up with what we're doing. I realize that there are so many different social media channels and accounts and ways to connect with people, but we are in a few places, and if one of these is your favorite, please join us, follow us, and interact with us. We're always asking to hear stories from people, to hear about what's going on in people's lives. It certainly would be great to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at A Face Project. We've also recently joined Anchor, and if you're not familiar with Anchor, it is an audio format social media platform. It's really, really a lot of fun, and especially for those of us who are working in an audio medium, it's an interesting way to connect with people. I think it's really intimate, hearing people's voices and not really knowing much else about them, but you're sort of having these conversations with strangers, and it's definitely worth checking out. We're on Anchor, a Face Project as well, and lately on Anchor I have been doing daily or every other day questions that I've been sort of labeling as mini stories. So a daily question, and through those we've been collecting ideas and anecdotes from folks all over the world. So join us on Anchor, join us wherever you like to spend your time in the social media world. Of course, we also have our regular website, afaceproject.com, and there you can subscribe to our quarterly magazine. But more importantly, if you have a story that you'd like to share, you can head to afaceproject.com and fill out our submission form, and maybe you will be on our podcast in an upcoming episode. Mental health, at least in America, where I live, certainly comes with its fair share of stigmas and misunderstandings. 1 in 5 American adults have experienced a mental health issue. 1 in 10 young people have experienced a period of major depression. 1 in 25 Americans have lived with a serious mental illness, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or major depression. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. It accounts for the loss of more than 41,000 American lives each year, more than double the number of lives lost to homicide. And I certainly don't want to spend this episode on a soapbox talking about the stigmas of mental health. What I do want to do is just draw attention to one story, one person's experience, in hopes that his story can broaden your understanding of his experience and what it's like to live with a mental health issue. A little background, Chris and I met in high school, and then he moved away out of town before we graduated. We stayed connected on Facebook, and a couple of years ago when I was just sort of playing around with a face project and getting this whole thing moving forward, he sent me a note saying that he'd really like to share his story and just bring awareness to one person's experience. So I have to give a big thank you to Chris for reaching out and wanting to share a very personal experience with us. Let's hear from Chris.
I think they were worried, but I think that they probably felt like, I have this medicine, everything's gonna be fine now. Because I didn't talk about it much. I never talked about, feelings much with my family. I don't think we're that kind of family. So with me not really bringing it up, and then knowing I had this medicine, it was kind of, everything should be okay, so we're not going to talk about it. Not about this kind of thing. I kept this inside and to myself for so long. I think it's important to get my story out there because there's a lot of misunderstanding around things like bipolar disorder. There's assumptions and there's stigmas and things like that, and everybody with it is different and it affects people differently, but this is just me.
Great.
I was pretty intelligent, so I think that they thought with all these things that they saw that I was okay. The only thing that they thought was a problem was my schoolwork, because I was intelligent, but I was a terrible student. And they saw that in my grades, but I think that they just assumed that I was lazy, which is fine, because that's what it looked like. Outwardly. It looked like I was just being lazy and not doing my homework. They didn't know that I couldn't hear a thing in school because I had everything inside my head, and they didn't know that I wasn't doing the homework because I wasn't in my room doing the homework. I was in my room crying, and they didn't know that. So they I heard a lot of, not living up to his potential when I was growing up. That's all I heard. And it's true, but on the other hand, I kind of couldn't help it. I had this thing taking over me, and I didn't know what it was. Well, I lived at home with my parents and my two sisters, my older sister, my younger sister. There was a lot going on around me, but not really a lot that involved me. My younger sister was much younger. I mean, she was a baby. My older sister was very ill for most of her life. So there was a lot, a lot of other things happening that required attention. 12, early teens, that period. I mean, I certainly don't blame anyone for not paying attention to me. There was, my sisters both had, needs greater than mine. But I think I was kind of left to fend for myself and didn't handle it very well. My older sister was a year and a half older than me. She was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 12 years old. She had a lot of complications from it, a lot of extra care involved. I think we got along fairly well. Looking back, I think that there was times where I didn't treat her so well. Analyzing it now as an adult, probably out of jealousy from the attention. At the time, I didn't feel jealous of her. She needed care. She was very sick. Yeah. Her kidneys ended up failing. She died in her sleep, though. It was pretty unexpected. When I was around my parents, I think that I hid all of this very well. Again, I didn't identify as being mentally ill, but I think when I would come out of an episode, I knew that, walking around with bleeding arms was not normal. I could see that. But I think with my family, I think I hid things very well. I was sort of the clown of the family. I would be making, I was the Joker and things like that. So I think that's the side that they saw. Bipolar disorder is an imbalance in the brain that causes mood spikes and mood declines, often rapidly, but not always. Was formerly called manic depressive disorder, but that's still the two basic sides to it, mania and depression. So your lows are going to be a depression, your highs are referred to as mania. I'm one of the rarities on the mania side. I think what most people's understanding of mania is a very elevated, very elated mood. It can lead to periods of very high productivity, extreme happiness, extreme elation, that kind of thing. That's happened to me before, but it's not, mostly it's different for me. And I'm not the only one. This does happen to other people, but for me, mania has been bouts of anger, which is not uncommon, and also a lot of impulsion, acting on impulse, impulsive spending, things like that. I've rarely gotten the happiness side of it. In one day, you could have, 10 mood changes, and it's just like a light switch. You're up, you're down, you're up, you're down. Mainly for myself, it's longer episodes, where a manic episode will last, it can last weeks, it can last months, and same with depression. And it's really, you can't predict it. You don't know. Medications can regulate it, I think, and slow down. If you're a rapid cycler, it can slow you down, but they regulate, they don't cure, unfortunately. I think a lot of people, they hear depression and they just think, oh, you're sad. But being sad is a very small percentage of depression. The worst part of depression is that you feel nothing. Alone in my room, usually had music on, but not always, and just sit alone and just feel just complete emptiness inside. I mean, I was also I was a self-harmer back then also, which came from, you know, the pain of this, and I think self-harm was a pain that I could control, and I think that's why I did it. I would use broken glass. If I would find like a piece of broken glass on the street, I'd pick it up and I would take it home with me and I'd keep it. And that's what I would use. Or I would take apart my razor I used to shave. I would take those apart and I would use those sometimes also. I just thought I was weird. And I think everyone around me did too. I didn't know about bipolar disorder. I didn't study psychology in 6th grade or anything like that. So I just figured, oh, that's who I am. I'm very strange and I do these very odd things. But I just assumed that's who I was. I didn't think of it as a psychology. I don't think kids really think of things a lot that way when they're that young. When you're 12, when you're 13, you don't think, hey, I'm going to look in a psychiatry book and see what's wrong with me. You know, hearing these things from other people, hearing that you're boring, you're weird, you're mean, and not being able to give an explanation, you know, it's hurtful because that affects your self-esteem, and I still have horrible self-esteem, you know, now. Because of things that I heard from other people my whole life, reacting to things that I couldn't explain. I knew that there was a good person inside me, and I knew that these people who were rejecting me were people that, you know, I probably had a lot in common with and could have built relationships with, could have built friendships with, but when what they're seeing is the worst of me and I couldn't control when the worst of me was going to show, there wasn't much I could do. I couldn't say to somebody, I know I'm not very fun to be around, but I promise you I'm a good person. I knew that some of this behavior was not normal. None of the other kids at school had cut up arms. So I hid it. I knew it needed to be hidden. I didn't have many friends, but the ones that I did, I wouldn't talk about it. Would be, you know, they spent their evenings, you know, doing their homework or watching television or spending time with friends. I didn't do any of that. So sometimes I would make up stories. Oh, what'd you do last night? Oh, I watched a couple movies on TV, you know. And no, the truth was I sat in my room and cried, or I sat in my room and stared at the wall for 6 hours. It was later in high school where I would start to have signs of mania, which in my case would be outbursts of anger. I was going to go into something, but I don't want that said. So in high school I would have these bouts of anger and I would throw furniture or I would punch walls. You know, I didn't feel like I had any control over it. I think it just, you know, I feel like it just happened. But during the episode, there's not really room in my head for analysis. It's just the actions are taking over and the conscience is sort of blank. It's not until afterward that I can take a step back. That was the wrong thing to do. I should not have done that. But I wouldn't ask myself why I did in the first place. There was regret, but there was no analysis. At one point I did, my parents did have me go to a psychiatrist at the very end of high school. I went because of this anger. You know, I went to him for one session right before I left for college. We sat for about a half hour saying absolutely nothing. He diagnosed me as depressed and he gave me antidepressants. Something happened which is not uncommon if you give only antidepressants to a bipolar person, and that is, I one day decided to take about half the bottle all at once. I mean, I certainly wouldn't call it a suicide attempt. It was a compulsion and a frustration where I wasn't feeling like this medicine was doing a thing for me. Maybe I'm not taking enough. I remember I did it, and then I went to get breakfast in the cafeteria, and I ended up passing out on the floor. They told me I couldn't lay down there, so I managed to make it to a table where I sat for quite a while, dry heaving. And after about maybe an hour of just the worst sickness feeling I ever had, just like that, this feeling passed, and I was fine. So I went back to my dorm and I threw out the rest of the pills. I said, okay, I'm done with those, when you're 22 and 23 years old, that age, I think, you have your friends, but your friends at that point, they want to have fun, and life is good. We're all single, and there's this kind of lifestyle for that age group that's dominant. But I didn't really feel like all that. I was in no mood for fun. And people saw that, and so people just figured I was kind of a drag, or I would act out. So again, I was the weird one. So I lost a lot of friends during those years. So that was difficult, because I think those are the years that, those are your formative years, I think. It wasn't until my mid-late 20s when I was properly diagnosed as bipolar disorder. I was living with my girlfriend. I was trying to hang up a picture. I got so angry with it that I smashed it, and I broke the whole thing. So she, at that point, because of that and because of some other things that she saw, contacted a relative of mine who's a nurse. So it was this relative of mine who had me go to a psychiatrist and kind of talk me through things that I need to be telling the doctor, and that's when I got diagnosed as bipolar officially. Medications are tricky. It takes a lot of trial and error. It takes a lot of trying different combinations, different dosages. So it takes a really long time. It was probably another 2 years before I found a regimen that that worked for me. And that's not uncommon. I mean, I'm good now, but I've been to a lot of doctors, and I've tried a lot of medications, like dozens. You do have to do trial and error to find the right kind of cocktail, but different doctors have different ways of doing things. Some are more minimalist, where they don't want you on any more than 3 different meds at once. Some are either trained differently or don't know what they're doing, or whatever it is, will just pack on medications. I had this one doctor who had me on, I was on like 11 medications, and then she added another one, and there's 2 medications that weren't supposed to be mixed, and she had me on extremely high doses of them, plus 10 other medications. I woke up one day and I couldn't walk. My brain had swelled, and so I go to the hospital, and I was out of work for like a couple months, and that was scary. And every doctor I've been to since then has been like, you're really lucky you survived that. I'm like, yes, I know. Above all, I feel old. This illness, I think, has a way of aging someone faster. You go through medication changes, you go through weight changes, different amounts of physical activity, and what's happening in your head As the mood elevates and declines and elevates and declines, stays high for a month and stays low for a month, it is absolutely exhausting. I don't think our bodies are meant to go through such changes. So while I'm 34, I don't, I feel more like in my 50s. I've developed nerve pain and I'm just exhausted. This has worn me out. So yeah, it's a mental illness, but it is very, very, very physical. Well, these days, I'm really looking up and I'm really looking forward, because I feel like I'm, in the most stable place that I've probably ever been as far as my health. I also found a support group for people with depression and bipolar disorder. I've met some really amazing friends through that, and I have the best friends I've ever had in my life through there. If there's something in your life that you feel like you can't control, then you should reach out. There's support groups, there's hotlines, even just going to a support group, and even if you don't want to talk at first, you can just listen to everybody else, and you'll hear a lot of what you're going through yourself. Your ability to share your story and your feelings will evolve, and your relationships will become more supportive, more intimate, and you'll come to rely on your fellow members for support. There's absolutely people from any walk of life you could imagine, but one of the key guidelines is that we are all equal. In that room, everybody is equal. Finding my support group was, probably the most significant positive change that's ever, as far as my health, ever happened. It's a big turning point because all of a sudden I have not just one or two people I could call a friend at a time. I have 20 or 30 people I could call a friend at a time. Someone will say, "Hey, I haven't heard from Chris in 2 days. Somebody check up on him. Somebody call so-and-so. Somebody call so-and-so, just see what's up." So it's this bond. Other people, they can read about us, they can learn about us. There's movies, there's documentaries, there's books. But unless you're living it, you don't completely get it. My friends completely get it. I try not, and it sounds so bad. I don't tend to think too far ahead. I feel like a long-term, any kind of long-term or even short-term goal, I feel like I'm resistant to make those kinds of goals simply because I'm so unpredictable. Which is a terrible way to live. But it sort of works for me. Goals and dreams are important. And everyone has a goal or a dream. Everyone, I'm going to buy a house next year. I'm going to go to Europe in 6 months, and this and that. And all that's great. But for me, I'm too unpredictable. There's been so many times that I set myself up for disappointment, and I set others up for me to disappoint them, that I feel like living day to day and keeping my daily routine to a point where I'm stable and I'm healthy and I'm waking up the next day, that's the best that I can do for myself. And I'm happy to do that, because every day is a challenge. So if I'm making it through, then I'm doing good.
I'm going to include some resources for those of you that are listening in case you're interested in learning more about mental health. If this story really, really resonates with you and you've been looking for a place to go or someone to turn to, Chris, our storyteller today, has provided some resources, which you can also find links to directly in the show notes on the website. Just go to afaceproject.com, look under our podcast menu, find episode number 11, Chris, and if you click on his story, you'll see photographs of Chris as well as some of these resources, but I'm also going to mention a few of them right here. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 800-273-TALK, T-A-L-K. The Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance is dbsa.org. And the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, N-A-M-I.org. This episode was recorded and produced by me. Photography by Natalie Jennings. Web layout and design by Aaron Woods. Once again, if you'd like links to any of the resources that Chris has included, please head on over to afaceproject.com, click on the podcast menu, find episode number 11, Chris, and there you'll find photographs of Chris, as well as links to the resources he's provided. We are a bi-monthly podcast, so we will be back with a new story in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, if you have enjoyed this podcast, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. We really, really appreciate any reviews. They help us to reach new listeners and to grow our storytelling community. So thank you very much.
That's tiring.
Well,
Yeah.
and